A Big Hammer video from a mostly Kill Team channel? Well, sort of. I do love Kill Team because I think Skirmish is an awesome scale for gameplay, but the local scene has a much wider vision on wargaming, so I do have to dabble here and there while I wait for the local groups to catch up. It has been weird running into people in those circles who know me from here, like I'm training my rivals. But Big Hammer does have a stepping stone for many seeking to wade into the purest of plastic addictions, Combat Patrol. One-box teams that can be pit against each other in small scale, allowing for the most basic of strategies and concepts to be beaten into the very soul of its players. And recently, 2 teams were released in the classic GW fashion. White Dwarf issue 509. Highly sought after, as these 2 teams are currently, I believe, the cheapest barrier of entry to the Combat Patrol level of play. As well, there are more than a handful of players who have connected on a spiritual level to these giant walking death balls. I also think they're pretty amazing, and I feel the drive to reveal to all of you how these 2 teams work in Combat Patrol. Eventually, I imagine the 40K app will get these rules as they have with others, but in this instance, I feel providing this service to all of you might be a bit beneficial. So, without hitting too much of a tangent, quick reminder, this is YouTube, so if you're into tabletop games, strategy, team information, hobby stuff, fun concepts, maybe subscribe if you're new. Possibly interact with a thumb, and if interested, hit the Discord link in the description below to join our little community. With that said, let's crack into these giant metal machines, but at a small scale. For those familiar with Combat Patrol, you're probably wondering, how the hell does Games Workshop use knights at this level? Well, with a little keyword shenanigans and a dream. 2 teams are part of issue 509, one designed as Imperial Knights, the other for Chaos. Similar in function, but with different scoring goals in mind, and decently different loadouts usable to execute those goals. The Imperial Knights are made up of 1 Helverin and 1 Warglaive. The Helverin, of course, taking on the role of long range with its dual autocannons and stubber, held back by the melee restriction of showing feet online. Statting here, as well as across all units, is similar to the full index, so no odd shift for potential balance, which to some might be a problem. Most combat patrols aren't known for their breadth of anti-tank options, so toughness 10 is gonna bring the pain to the uninitiated. The keen-eyed Knights player might have noticed, however, that there are no abilities tied to these units outside of Deadly Demise and the usual damage bracketing. This is the same across the board for all these units, just raw stat sticks. The Helverin, as stated, existing as super long range. Considering the reduced distance of a combat patrol board, 48-inch autocannons are basically set as see something, shoot something. And remember, there are 2 of those, so 8 attacks with a ridiculous strength and damage profile. This is not the unit to just pop out in front of without a plan. The Warglaive plays its role more in the mid-range, not hard with the 12-inch movement. Melee is nothing to laugh at with the Chain Cleaver. Its thermal spear into many will usually only have a target or 2 that it's truly meant for. Most combat patrols only come with 1 mid-durability vehicle or monster, and that unit should probably work to avoid this vehicle. Try especially hard to distance further than the 12-inch threat the Melta profile has. Truly horrifying, and with yet another stubber to add a little more anti-fodder to the mix. The Chaos Knight variants are a bit more mid-range in their qualities. A Stalker rocking a chain cannon and claw, but with the indirect anti-fodder of a Havoc launcher. Because we have to teach them early how it feels to have your mechanics units relentlessly smashed from across the board. Beyond that, the Slaughter Claw is only given 1 profile meant for anti-tank, and the Avenger Chain Cannon, like most of the more knightly ranged weapons on this team, is limited to 24 inches. Keep that in mind as an opponent if you're scared of return fire and don't have much terrain to help. Staying outside of 36 inches is a possibility, although not a strong one with the smaller battlefield. The Brigand brings what Brigands are best known for, thermal and chain cannon, but restricted to a stubber, which I agree with. Double Havoc would be a bit much at this scale. Some may have noticed among all the keywords for every model in both of these teams that the term character is present. This may be important for some teams that gain possible points benefits when killing enemy characters. Just something to think about. The structure and playstyle of both teams are very close to each other, which might be useful for opponents to the mechanized giants to only learn some variations in strategy. First up, a shared downside for both teams, but a balanced downside. To walk the path of the knight, you must forego regular methods of scoring. Mission scoring rules do not matter. Only players of the smaller statured units will focus on those. Instead, both teams have access to one mission. The knight player will first choose a target to be considered primary for the turn. The opponent will choose one to be considered secondary. For the Imperials, objectives that need to be controlled. For Chaos, blood to be spilled or enemy units to be destroyed. A target can be considered both primary and secondary. So for at least the Chaos team, if only one enemy squad lives, that squad is both primary and secondary. I think this can give Chaos the edge potentially, although they can't necessarily pop off too soon against smaller unit teams. They'll have to control the slaughter. Imperial Knights should be fine with theirs for the most part, but always assume their enemy will mark the far objective as the secondary. At the very least, all these knights, despite being characters, are also battle line, so the general rule of sticky objectives still applies in Combat Patrol. Should make scoring 5 points at least fairly easy for the Imperials. The marking is a bit different between teams. Imperials mark at the top of the move phase, Chaos in the command phase. Now, there is still value in trying to control objectives, even if there isn't a direct scoring potential for it. Denying enemy points can be just as valuable for a team like this, so keep that in mind. Beyond the scoring limitation, both teams can choose in the command phase one benefit from a list of 3 to provide to one of their units. Imperial choosing between fall back and shoot, 4 bonus objective control, and a 1 wound heal. Chaos relegated to a D3+1 fallback or normal move in the command phase, sustained hits 2 on melee weapons, or a 1 wound heal as well. Imperial Knights are pretty much fully designed for tactical play with these. Fallback and shoot, keeping the Warglaive momentum going, or keeping the Helverin's hit stat up for maximum potential damage, or upping OC to 12 on an Armiger to maximize the potential to score on their team mission. And of course, a heal, which seems small, but it is going to be real hard for enemies to scratch these armors. The big one for Chaos will probably be the D3+1 move or fall back. It is super useful for threat range manipulation, but keep in mind that falling back in the command phase is still part of your turn, so fallback will normally prevent shooting or charging. This, however, is meant to combo with one of the stratagems the team has access to. More on that in a second. Adding Sustain 2 to melee might be useful, as the Slaughter Claw is a bit lacking for attacks, but that is still heavy on the risk of needing to roll 6s. Bit of a struggle, but if you don't need the movement, why not? Enhancements for these teams run a little different than others. Normally, Combat Patrols get one character who can pick between 2 upgrade options for the game. For Knights, each upgrade is tied to each Knight unit. The Imperial Helverin can potentially gain a bonus CP on a roll of a 2+ if it kills a character. The Warglaive can trigger a once per battle Feel No Pain of 6+ at the start of the fight phase. The Chaos Stalker gets a fight on death function on a 2+ roll. It will be bracketed for the fight though, so a reduced hit rating. The Brigand gets the ability to set up in reserve and come in wholly within 9 inches of the table edge and outside of 6 inches of enemies, but it can't charge if it's set up within 9 inches of an enemy. As either team, you will have to choose which knight will bring its buff to the table. The other will only be its raw stats, nothing more. Personally, I'm leaning into the Warglaive and Brigand upgrades, although since the Chaos Knights really need to kill things to score, they'll probably have to settle for some fight on death potential. As with all Combat Patrols, 3 stratagems, all costing 1 command point each. One that is shared involves selecting a single knight during your movement phase, and providing it the benefit of walking through enemy units so long as the move does not end within engagement range. This will prevent desperate escape attempts as well. Great for maneuverability. Imperials can choose an Armiger in the charge phase just after it makes a charge. It will force one enemy unit within range to take a battle shock test at -1. Further function for trying to flip and control objectives. Lastly, for the Armigers, they can provide ranged weapons for one unit the ability to ignore cover in the shooting phase. This will also ignore modifiers to the hit roll, helping out bracketed models potentially in the late game. From the Chaos side of the fence, you can choose one War Dog in the fight phase to improve the armor pen of its melee weapons. If it uses the Slaughter Claw, it gains 2 additional attacks, so a bit better with the Sustained 2 upgrade. If it's using feet, 4 extra attacks. Foot fetishists unite. Lastly, in the charge phase, a War Dog can be allowed to charge if it fell back that turn, so long as its target wasn't in its engagement range at the start of the turn. This is a bit specific, but this ties in with that D3+1 fallback in the command phase. It allows the unit to still charge, but only if another target exists. Worst case scenario, if you use the command fallback and don't have much else to do, you should still be able to perform a normal move or advance and go elsewhere. So a lot of tools in the toolbox for both teams, all highly refined to ensure maximum potential in combat patrol scale, with the added benefit of not needing to be too afraid of most units they will be facing. So, were they a good idea to add to this scale? I actually think so. A common concept in competitive 40k is that you will need to be ready and capable of taking on knights. They tend to be a fairly common army. Skilled players learn quickly how to treat their teams like a resource for points gain into this kind of issue. Protect the units that can break knights for as long as possible, expend them in the right moments, trick knights to position in bad ways that might cause issues in following turns, and always be scoring to the best of your ability. It's less about slamming face into fist and more about having a plan and flawlessly executing, and it is good to learn this early. A tactic I see used often in combat patrol is using armor to take the midfield because most teams have nothing better than wiffle bats to try and chip away at the hull, maybe one or two solid damage dealers, but those usually come with a lot of risk and the results might fizzle out. And as the knight player, you might think it will be easy to bully people out with these stat beat sticks, but recognize that you are very limited on resources and your save and toughness will be a great filter for the most part, but under some weight of fire, those 12 wounds won't feel like enough of a cushion. Losing or even bracketing a knight early will most likely secure a loss in many situations. For those seeking to snag these combat patrols, they are indeed one box, either a box of armigers or a box of war dogs, depending on your allegiance. The weapon loadouts are different, and if you plan on continuing your journey into the realm of knights and 40k going forward, you'll probably want both eventually, as there is some overlap in gear. Combat patrol is a great way to run fast examples of things to expect in 40k. It is quite the departure from the alternating back and forth of Kill Team, which people over here have certainly grown to love, but it does carry its own value in the wargaming space. Definitely give it a try if you're looking to expand your horizons. But how do you all feel about these additions to the combat patrol space? Worried that your local scene might suddenly be saturated in 2-unit tank lists? Worried that the type of unit and playstyle might cause some issue with newer players who don't expect the hyper-elite stats out of their enemies? Or, like me, do you look forward to the challenge, solving the riddle of what to do when your enemy feels hard to overcome? Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to continue the conversation, remember, there is a Discord link in the description. Join up, we'll be happy to have you. I know this was a bit of a departure, but I've always said I want to expand a bit when I am able, and this felt just right to bring to all of you. Hopefully you enjoyed the info. As always, likes for the like god and subscribes for the subscribe throne. I am Kimmerix, and I'll see you in the next one.